There's a version of you that you have been avoiding. Not the version that fails, not the version that makes mistakes or falls short or disappoints the people around them. You have made a kind of peace with that version. You have learned to live alongside the fear of failure, to function in its presence, to keep moving even when it is loud. The version you have been avoiding is different. It is the version that succeeds, the version that is fully expressed, that speaks without the careful management of every word, that creates without the constant monitoring of whether the creation will be acceptable, that loves without the protective distance of someone who has learned to expect abandonment, that shows up completely without the fractional withholding that has become so habitual it no longer feels like withholding at all. It just feels like you. This version of yourself is not a fantasy. It is not an inflated self-image or a narcissistic projection. It is the person your subconscious has always known you are, beneath every limiting program, beneath every belief installed by circumstances you did not choose, beneath every performance of a smaller self than the one that lives in your deepest intelligence. That person has always been there, waiting, not passively, with a kind of quiet, persistent pressure, the restlessness that will not fully resolve, the recurring sense that something essential has not yet been expressed. The dreams that arrive in sleep and disappear with the morning, but leave a residue of possibility that the waking day has not quite been able to extinguish. That pressure, that restlessness, that residue is the person you fear becoming, asking you to stop being afraid of them. Today we begin to understand why the fear exists and how to finally walk through it. In 1992, a South African poet and activist named Marianne Williamson wrote something that has been quoted so often in the decades since that it has almost lost its power through familiarity. But I want to give it back its power today, because it points toward the precise subconscious mechanism we are exploring. She wrote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is not our darkness that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children did. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same." When I first encountered this passage, I felt its power but did not fully understand its mechanism. I did not understand why, neurologically, the fear of one's own greatness would be more fundamental than the fear of one's own inadequacy. Now, having spent years studying the subconscious mind, I understand it completely. The subconscious is programmed primarily for one thing, safety, and safety to the subconscious is defined not by thriving, but by belonging, by fitting within the range of what is expected, what is familiar, what the people around you can accommodate without discomfort. The person who remains small, who stays within the understood range of their family and community and social world, is subconsciously safe. The person who expands beyond that range, who becomes more than the people around them expected, who shines in ways that create contrast with the people they love, risks something the subconscious registers as genuine danger, rejection, isolation, the loss of belonging. And so the subconscious, in its faithful, precise, ultimately misguided attempt to keep you safe, generates fear every time you approach the threshold of genuine expansion. Not the fear of failure, the fear of success, the fear of becoming the person who is too much, too bright, too capable, too alive, for the world that formed you to fully contain. Carl Jung spent decades studying a phenomenon he called the shadow. The shadow is not as popular culture tends to interpret it, simply the dark or negative aspects of the self. The shadow is everything that has been pushed out of the conscious personality and into the unconscious. Everything that did not fit the image of who you were supposed to be, who your family needed you to be, who your culture approved of, who your early experiences told you was safe to express. This includes, yes, the impulses and fears and wounds that most people associate with the idea of shadow work. But it also includes something that receives far less attention. It includes the unlived positive potential, the gifts that were never expressed because expression felt dangerous, the intelligence that was never fully deployed because being too capable made others uncomfortable, the creativity that was suppressed because it drew attention, the leadership that was set aside because it created distance from the group, the love that was withheld because being fully loving had been met with pain. Jung believed that the process of genuine psychological maturity, what he called individuation, required a person to face and integrate both dimensions of the shadow, the dark and the light, the wounds, and the unlived gifts. And he observed that the integration of the positive shadow of the unlived potential was often more frightening and more resisted than the integration of the darker material, because the darkness, however painful, is familiar, it has been lived with, it has been accommodated. It has been given a place in the story of who you are. But the unlived positive potential, the person you could be if you fully expressed what you genuinely are, that is unknown. And the unknown is what the subconscious most fears, not because it is dangerous, but because it requires a surrender of the current identity, a willingness to become someone the existing programs do not recognize, someone the existing tribe may not be able to fully contain. Let me show you how this fear manifests in ordinary life, because it is rarely experienced as the dramatic confrontation with greatness that its description might suggest. It arrives in much smaller and more familiar moments. It arrives in the moment just before you send the email that says exactly what you think rather than what you believe will be well received, the slight hesitation, the softening of the language, the final edit that removes the sentence that was too honest, too direct, too much yourself. It arrives in the creative work that stops just short of its genuine potential, the painting that gets abandoned before it fully emerges, the book that never quite gets finished, the project that hovers perpetually at 90% completion, because completion would make it real, and real would make it visible. Invisible means vulnerable to the judgment that the not quite finished version is immune to. It arrives in the relationship that reaches a certain depth of genuine intimacy and then meets an invisible ceiling, a slight withdrawal, a new preoccupation with minor grievances, a sudden awareness of incompatibilities that were not troubling before the intimacy deepened. Because genuine intimacy is also genuine visibility, and genuine visibility is what the subconscious has learned to fear. It arrives in the professional opportunity that you find reasons not to pursue, in the stage you do not step onto, in the offer you decline, in the hand you do not raise, not from calculated strategic decision, from the subconscious recognition that accepting would change the story of who you are. And changing the story of who you are is terrifying, even when the current story is a fraction of the actual truth, because the current story is known, and the next story, the one that contains the person you fear becoming, is not yet written, and the blank page is the most frightening thing available to a human being who has learned to live within lines. Where does this fear come from? How does the subconscious come to associate genuine self-expression and full expansion with danger? The answer begins, as so many of our subconscious programs do, in childhood, in the theta download window when everything entered without filter, and in the specific experiences that taught us, often without a single explicit word being said, what the consequences of full expression were, for many people, The earliest experiences of being fully themselves, of expressing genuine enthusiasm, genuine intelligence, genuine emotion, genuine creativity, were met with responses that the developing subconscious registered as threat. The parent who was made uncomfortable by the child's intensity, who responded to the full expression of the child's emotional or intellectual life with dismissal, with ridicule, with the cooling that comes from an adult who does not know how to meet a child in their full aliveness. The sibling relationships where being too capable or too expressive created resentment, where the implicit lesson was that showing your light cost you belonging. The school environment where standing out, in any direction, invited a social response that the developing nervous system filed under dangerous. The family system where there was an unconscious rule, never articulated, powerfully enforced, that a certain level of expansion beyond the family's current range was somehow a betrayal, a leaving behind, a making visible of the family's own unlived potential in a way that created discomfort rather than pride. These experiences, received in theta, absorbed without filter, became subconscious programs. Not the conscious belief that I should not be too much, but the automatic, preconscious contraction that happens before the thought even forms, the hesitation, the softening, the withdrawal, the stopping just short. All of it is the subconscious faithfully executing a program installed before you had any say in the matter, faithfully protecting you from a danger that existed then, but does not necessarily exist now. The child needed to contain themselves to preserve belonging. The adult does not, but the program runs as if they do every time, without pause, without evaluation of whether the current context actually requires the contraction. Because that is what programs do. They run regardless of relevance, until they are updated. I want to speak about the cost of not becoming the person you fear becoming, because this cost is rarely discussed with the seriousness it deserves. Most conversations about potential and self-expression focus on what becomes possible when you allow yourself to fully emerge, and that is important. But the cost of the suppression, the ongoing, daily, cumulative cost of maintaining the subconscious contract that says I will not become too much, deserves equal attention. The most immediate cost is energy. The containment of genuine self requires continuous subconscious effort. The monitoring of expression, the management of how much is revealed, the calibration of presence to remain within the acceptable range. All of this is not passive. It is active. It consumes processing power, emotional bandwidth, creative energy. The person who spends 20 years containing their genuine self has spent 20 years of subconscious resource on the maintenance of that containment. 20 years of creative and intellectual and emotional bandwidth that was never available for the things that actually mattered, because it was occupied with the work of not being too much. The second cost is to the people around you. This one is the most counterintuitive and the most important. When you contain your genuine self to protect other people from discomfort, you are making a decision on their behalf that they did not ask you to make. You are deciding that they cannot handle your full expression, that your light will blind rather than illuminate, that your expansion will diminish rather than inspire, and in those cases, you are wrong. Marianne Williamson understood this. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. The people who have most expanded the lives of the people around them are almost never the ones who contain themselves carefully. They are the ones who became fully themselves, without apology, without calibration for the comfort of the audience, and in doing so created a permission field, an implicit invitation to everyone in their world to do the same. Your suppression does not protect the people you love. It deprives them of the permission your genuine expression would give them. And the third cost is the one the subconscious itself eventually cannot ignore. The cost of the life unlived. Jung wrote that the unlived life is the most powerful shadow of all, that everything we do not express does not disappear, it turns inward, and what turns inward long enough without outlet becomes the source of the depression, the anxiety, the inexplicable restlessness, the chronic sense of something missing that nothing in the available life seems able to fill. Because what is missing is not in the available life. What is missing is the life that would exist if the person you fear becoming were finally allowed to emerge. Here is something I want you to hold for a moment. Something that may be the most important thing said in this entire video. Your subconscious already knows who you are, not who you have been, not who you have allowed yourself to become in the context of the programs that were installed before you had any say. Not the contained, carefully managed, strategically appropriate version of yourself that has learned to navigate the world without too much friction. Your subconscious knows the full version, the uncontained version, the one that was present before the programs arrived. Before the theta downloads taught you that full expression was dangerous. Before the experiences of not being met taught you to preemptively withhold. This is not mysticism. This is the direct implication of what we know about neuroplasticity and the architecture of the subconscious mind. Your deepest programming, the most fundamental layer of your subconscious identity, precedes the fear-based programs that were installed on top of it. Beneath the I am too much program is a layer that simply knows, without apology and without calibration, what it is genuinely capable of. Beneath the I will lose belonging if I shine too brightly program is a layer that knows the particular quality of light it was built to generate. Beneath the not yet ready program is a layer that has been ready for longer than you have been willing to acknowledge. The fear of becoming the person you are afraid to be is not the fear of something foreign. It is the fear of something known. It is the ego's fear of the self, the constructed identity's fear of the genuine one, the program's fear of what lies beneath the program. And what lies beneath the program is you, the actual you, the one your subconscious has been faithfully holding through every contraction, through every hesitation, through every moment of stopping just short, waiting for the moment when the fear becomes less powerful than the pull toward genuine expression. That moment is available now. In this video, in this understanding, in the decision that begins to form in the deepest layer of your subconscious as you recognize yourself in what is being described. So how do you actually begin to become the person you have been afraid to be? How do you move neurologically from the subconscious program of contraction and containment to the genuine expansion of a self that is no longer afraid of its own light? The process begins with something that sounds deceptively simple: recognition. Before any technique, before any practice, before any protocol of subconscious reprogramming, you need to recognize what is actually happening, to see the contraction for what it is, a program, not a truth, not a permanent feature of reality, not evidence that the contained version is genuinely who you are. A subconscious program installed by circumstances that were real, by experiences that genuinely happened, but which is no longer accurately describing the actual territory of your potential. This recognition requires a specific kind of honest attention, the willingness to notice, not with judgment, but with clarity, the moments when the contraction happens, the hesitation before the email is sent, the withdrawal before the intimacy deepens, the stopping just short before the creative work is finished, the declining of the opportunity before the fear is even fully conscious. Begin to notice these moments. Not to immediately overcome them, simply to see them clearly, to name them as the program rather than the truth. Because the moment you can see a program as a program, The moment you can create even the smallest distance between the automatic response and your genuine response, you have created the opening through which something different becomes possible. The second step is what I call shadow illumination, the deliberate bringing into conscious awareness of the specific positive potential that has been kept in the shadow. This is a practice of genuine honesty about what you are capable of, about what you would do, create, become. If the subconscious fear program were not operating, not the inflated fantasies of the ego's compensation for its wounds, but the genuine, grounded, specific recognition of the gifts that have been available all along and that the fear has been preventing from full expression, write it down. In your journal, in the morning, theta window, in the privacy that serious self-knowledge requires. What would you do if you were not afraid of becoming it? What would you say? What would you create? What would you pursue? What version of yourself would you finally allow to be visible? The writing makes it real. And what becomes real in the subconscious eventually becomes real in the world. Now, let me give you the specific subconscious reprogramming protocol for this particular fear. Because the fear of one's own potential is a specific program, and it responds best to specific practices. The first practice is what I call the full expression moment. Every day, in at least one area of your life, you practice complete expression without the habitual contraction. You say the thing you would normally soften. You share the work you would normally withhold until it is more acceptable. You show up with the level of presence you usually reserve for the moments when you feel safe enough to be fully there. You do this not to be reckless or inconsiderate of others, but to give your subconscious a daily experience of full expression without the feared consequence actually materializing, because the subconscious learns from experience more powerfully than from intention. And every day that you express fully without the relationship ending, without the belonging being lost, without the world collapsing under the weight of your genuine presence, is a day the subconscious updates its program. Evidence accumulates. The old fear loses a fraction of its neural weight. The new experience gains a fraction of neural pathway strength, compounded over days and weeks and months. The program genuinely changes. The second practice is the morning identity installation. In the theta window after waking, before the program has fully assembled itself for the day, you spend 10 minutes inhabiting the identity of the person you have been afraid to be, not performing them, inhabiting them. What does it feel like to move through the world as someone who is not afraid of their own light? Not the bravado of someone who has nothing to fear, but the quiet certainty of someone who has decided that the fear is no longer more important than the expression. Feel this in your body, in the quality of your breath, and the way the chest opens rather than contracts, in the quality of presence that becomes available when the monitoring of how much is too much is finally set aside. Hold that quality for 10 minutes, and then carry it into the day as your subconscious orientation, not perfectly. Not without the old program reasserting itself, but with the genuine intention of someone who has decided that today, the person they are afraid to be gets a little more space than they were given yesterday. There is a dimension of becoming the person you fear becoming that is almost never discussed in the context of individual subconscious work. And it is perhaps the most practically important dimension of all, the role of the people around you. The subconscious fear of full expression was installed in relationship, in the specific relational experiences that taught the developing nervous system that certain levels of self-expression had social consequences. And because the fear was installed in relationship, it is, in large part, healed in relationship. This does not mean that the healing requires the specific people who installed the program to participate in its undoing. In many cases, those people are not available, or not willing, or not capable of providing what the healing requires. But it does mean that the experience of being fully seen and not rejected, of expressing the unlived potential and being met with genuine recognition rather than the feared consequence, is one of the most powerful updating experiences available to the subconscious. When you allow yourself to be fully expressed in the presence of someone who can genuinely receive that expression, something happens at the neurological level that no amount of solo theta work can fully replicate. The social survival system, which was the primary installer of the contraction program, receives new data. The data that full expression does not always lead to loss, that the light does not always blind, that becoming more fully yourself can draw people closer rather than pushing them away. Find the people who can hold your full expression without flinching, without the subtle signals that you are becoming too much, without the barely visible withdrawal that has been part of the subconscious cost-benefit analysis for the genuine expression of who you are. These people exist. They may not be the people who have been closest to you for the longest time, but they exist, and proximity to them is one of the most powerful healing and expanding experiences available to someone in the process of becoming the person they have been afraid to be. History is full of people who faced the fear of their own potential and chose to walk through it. Their stories are instructive not because they were extraordinary people in some fixed and innate sense, but because they made a choice that is available to every human being, the choice to become the person the subconscious has always known them to be. In the face of the fear that the expansion will cost more than they can afford to pay, Frida Kahlo spent years painting in private. The extraordinary, vivid, brutally honest paintings that would eventually make her one of the most recognized artists of the 20th century, but which in their early years she shared with almost no one because they were too much of herself to risk exposing. She was painting the person she feared becoming, though it was too physical, too emotional, too present in her own body and pain and sexuality and cultural identity to be comfortable for the world she was navigating. And then she showed the paintings, and the world, which she had feared would find her too much, could not look away. Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet, whose work has been translated into more languages than that of any other poet in history, wrote from a place of complete self-revelation, from the depths of grief and love and spiritual longing that most people keep carefully hidden behind the appropriate social presentation. He became the person he must have feared becoming, the one who wept in public, who expressed the unspeakable, who made visible the interior life that convention insisted should remain private, and in doing so, gave millions of people across 8 centuries permission to recognize their own interior life in his words. Rosa Parks, on a December evening in 1955, became the person she had perhaps always known she was, but which the world around her had insisted was dangerous to be. She did not plan it as a historic act. She simply reached the moment where the fear of remaining contained was finally less powerful than the pull toward genuine expression. And in that moment of becoming the person she had feared being, she changed the world. Each of these people faced the same fear you face, the fear of the consequences of full expression, of the belonging that might be lost, of the responses that might arrive when the light is no longer contained, and each of them found, in their own way, in their own moment, that the feared consequences were less certain and the gifts of full expression were more real than the contraction program had led them to believe. I want to offer you a reframe of the fear that may be the most useful thing in this entire video. What if the fear itself is a signal? What if the particular quality of fear that arises when you approach the threshold of genuine self-expression, the specific anxiety that appears when you are about to become the person you have been afraid to be, is not primarily a warning, but a compass in navigation? You use magnetic north not as a destination, but as a reference point, the direction toward which the compass points tells you where you are in relation to where you want to go. What if the fear of your own potential works in a similar way? What if the presence of the fear is the subconscious's way of indicating that you are pointing towards something real, something genuinely yours, something that the deeper intelligence knows is worth the discomfort of the expansion required to reach it? The things we are most afraid to become are often precisely the things we were most built to be. The writer who fears that their genuine voice is too strange, too dark, too honest, is often the writer whose genuine voice is exactly what the world most needs to hear. The leader who fears that their genuine vision is too ambitious, too unconventional, too much of a departure from what is expected, is often the leader whose genuine vision is exactly what the situation most requires. The person who fears that their genuine love is too intense, too vulnerable, too present for the people around them to fully receive is often the person whose love, when it finds its right context, is exactly the quality of love that heals the fear, points toward the gift. Not infallibly, not without the need for discernment and wisdom and the honest counsel of people who know you well, but more reliably than the fear would have you believe. Learn to read the fear differently, not as stop, but as you are getting warm, not as this will cost you everything, but as this is what your subconscious has always known you were built for, and begin to move toward it. Even while the fear is present, especially while the fear is present, let us come back to where we began. There is a version of you that you've been avoiding, not the version that fails, the version that fully emerges, the version that expresses without the careful management of how much is too much, the version that creates from genuine inspiration rather than from the calculation of what will be acceptable, the version that loves without the protective distance of someone who has learned to expect the withdrawal of love when they become too much, the version that shows up completely without the fractional withholding that has become so habitual it no longer feels like withholding at all. That version is not a fantasy. It is the person your subconscious has always known you are, beneath every limiting program installed by experiences you did not choose, beneath every contraction learned in the context of relationships that could not hold your full expression, beneath every moment of stopping just short. That person has been present, waiting with the quiet, persistent patience of something that knows it is real, regardless of whether it has yet been allowed to be fully visible. Marianne Williamson was right. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. It is that we are powerful beyond measure. And Carl Jung was right that the unlived positive potential is the most powerful shadow of all. And the ancient Stoics were right that the quality of a life is determined by the quality of the self that lives it. And your subconscious has been right all along about who you actually are. The person you fear becoming is not a stranger. It is not an inflated version of yourself that bears no relationship to the truth. It is the truth. The specific, irreplaceable, genuinely needed truth of what you are capable of being in this world. The world does not need another carefully managed presence, another person who has learned to contain themselves to the precise measure that will not create discomfort for the people around them. The world needs you, fully expressed, genuinely present, unafraid, or rather, afraid and moving toward the threshold anyway. Because the courage is not the absence of the fear. The courage is the decision that the person waiting on the other side of the fear is worth the fear. And they have always become them. Subscribe to Awake Mind. I will see you in the next one.